How are you?
Hello,
How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you. Good to see you.
Nice to see you. So, I have a couple of housekeeping things I need to take care of before we start chatting. We've got a lot of people on this call. A lot of people want to hear what you've got to say about a lot of different things.
Okay.
So, I just need to tell everybody that this Zoom call is being recorded and that closed captioning is provided by Otter. Thank you, Otter. And if you want the closed captioning, then click the link in chat to access it. That is the housekeeping taken care of. So, Dawoud, how the devil are you in this extraordinary moment, self-isolating in Chicago?
Uh, it has been difficult, but I would say it's gotten less difficult
As time has
because,
gone on.
well, it's become apparent to me that I'm going to have to get on with some aspect of my life, even though the work, for obvious reasons, has come to a kind of temporary halt.
Yeah,
And we can talk about that. But just in terms of being able to see my friends,
yeah,
to go out and have dinner, to have live human contact.
yeah.
Uh,
It's tough.
yeah, I've been coming out, but quite honestly, for I don't know, for at least the first 2 months, maybe 2.5 months, I didn't go out at all.
Yeah.
You know,
Well,
I kind of,
as with so many of us. Um, Now,
I have a tall glass of iced tea, by the way.
you've got iced tea. I've
Okay,
got hot
cheers.
tea. Cheers.
Uh,
um, it came this moment came at an extraordinary moment for you as well, because you have so much going on. I
I
mean,
know,
you had the
I
exhibition in
know.
San Francisco. You're working in Louisiana on a big project. Many other museum projects are are waiting to land. And so you were so busy, and then you've had this enforced hiatus. How have you been coping with all of
I
the
know this massive
rescheduling?
disruption,
Yeah,
which among among other things, it has reminded me, not that I need to be reminded, but it's reminded me just how absolutely busy I have been, because I've never, unless I'm working, unless I'm working, I've never uh, been home or in one place for three or four, 3 or 4 months.
yeah,
Uh, so that has certainly been uh, very unusual for me. And then obviously, uh, within the shape of the pandemic, has made it that much more stressful, because basically, for as long as I can remember, I mean, I've been working a very long time, obviously, and for as long as I can remember, uh, there has never been a period where I'm either not someplace making work or someplace having meetings with a museum about an upcoming project while
yeah,
I'm completing another project. I actually had a pretty good system figured out for getting other projects started before one was finished. And then I would start a project, get that into production. And while it was in production, go to New York for a week or so, or go to LA and see my son, come back, my negatives and contacts are ready, and keep working right up until the work would be in production for an exhibition. And that's pretty much been my life for, I don't know, the last few decades.
So how has this moment of enforced hiatus changed the way that you're thinking about working or working at the moment?
Not really. It's kind of put the brakes on. I've had friends, other artist friends, at least one who's probably listening in right now, who have told me, Dawoud, why don't you just make some photographs, make something, you know, make some photographs about what it's like in this moment. And I realize how unlike the way I work that is. This
Right.
idea of just going out and making some pictures. I haven't thought about my work that way since I don't even remember when, because even when I started photographing in Harlem in 1975, that was about going to Harlem. It was about visualizing an idea about that community, you know. And then when I was making other kinds of pictures, the pictures have always come out of a particular idea, and that tells me what I need to do.
And the work has been, since 1975, the work has been very structured around projects. And the projects have really been very mapped out and planned out and executed. So are you using this time to think about future projects and to plan them? Or are you just really having a little bit of a quiet break?
A quiet point, because I've already had the meetings about the next project already. So I'm always a step ahead of.
I'm trying to get you to tell us about those next projects because we want to know what they are.
Well, let me tell you about this project.
Okay.
You know, and let me give it some context, because since 2012, when I started the Birmingham Project, my work has been very centered around the idea of history, looking at the way history kind of intersects with the contemporary moment, and specifically around ideas or specific moments or events around African American history, and how to make work about that history that brings it into a contemporary conversation. So that particular work began with the Birmingham work. That was very much about a particular moment, September 15th, 1963. It was about a very specific moment, and how to bring the moment of the traumatic murder of those 4 girls in the church and 2 black boys who were killed in the aftermath of that, how to make work about that. You obviously can't show that, and it's of no interest to me to just go to the place and make pictures of where the thing happened. So how do you find some kind of conceptual frame through which to bring it back into this moment? So that was the first time that I really began thinking about the idea of history. And it came out of what was, I have to say, quite literally a sort of epiphany, because that was the first time I started working that way. And one morning, I kind of lose track of time now. It had to have been maybe 10 years ago. I was still in the midst of wrapping up another project, Class Pictures. But one morning, I had this moment where I literally sat bolt upright in bed. And this image came back to me that I had first seen when I was, 1964. I would have been 11 years old.
Right.
And it was an image of Sarah Jean Collins, who was one of the girls who was also present when the bombing of the church happened. Her sister Addie Mae Collins was killed. She was there, she was wounded, but she survived. And when I was 11 years old, my parents brought home this book called The Movement. And there was a photograph of that girl in the book. And I very often say that my life could probably be spoken of as my life before that picture and my life after.
Wow.
Because it really shook me to
It
the
had
core.
such an impact on you.
Yeah, it really shook me to the core. And obviously embedded itself deeply in my psyche. And over the years, I guess I parked it somewhere. It's not like I woke up thinking about it every day, but one morning, it just came rushing back with such a force that it, I had heard that expression to sit bolt upright.
Yeah.
I thought it was just an expression, but it's not, it's real. Because I literally sat bolt upright in bed, almost as if someone had slapped me on the back of the head. And it was the image of that girl.
Wow.
Which I had at that point, I don't know, I hadn't seen that image for maybe 45, 50 years or something, but it was obviously still there.
It was in the memory bank.
Yeah, something, I'm sure if I were to lay down on a therapist's couch, I might be able to figure out what shook it loose. I don't know if it was something I saw, something somebody said to my son, I don't know what it was, but something shook it loose.
But Dawoud, I want to ask you specifically, because you said something just a few minutes ago in relationship to the Birmingham Project, which is such a beautiful, powerful evocation of a moment without illustrating it, but you searched for a way to depict the moment, to reconstruct the history of the moment, to recontextualize the moment. And I find that series just unbelievably touching and powerful. And I think it feeds very directly into what you do in Night Coming Tenderly, where you don't actually depict necessarily scenes, that you couldn't go and find the scenes of the Underground Railroad literally, but you depict you project the mood of escape or being hunted into those images in a very powerful way. That you kind of have to channel. You must have had to channel the idea of the moment and searched for a way to depict it. Can you talk about that a little bit?
I think for Night Coming Tenderly Black, in particular, the word channel is probably more accurate to describe the way of working than Birmingham. Because Birmingham, for me, started with several years of going back and forth, getting to meet people in the community, getting to know the community, doing research at the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, which is where I found out about the two boys. If I had just gone there and started working, I would have made a project about the four girls. But I spent a considerable amount of time doing research. So for Birmingham, it was more about finding the conceptual shape. These young people represent those young people, but how do you represent in a still photograph the passage of time?
Yeah.
And I came to this idea of having an adult who was the exact age, which made it kind of complicated because I didn't just want them to be older people. For me, part of the resonance lies in them being the exact age, 13 and, 63, 50 years. So it was more about figuring out the conceptual shape and this idea of how to make that aspect of the Black past resonate in the contemporary moment. Night Coming Tenderly Black was an even bigger shift because the Birmingham Project was still rooted in the portrait, which is something, well, let's just say I know a lot about the portrait.
It was familiar territory.
Yeah, it was something I've been thinking about and working through going back to 1975.
Yeah.
So I think the conceptual shift with Night Coming Tenderly Black is that the Black subject is now not in front of the camera. I'm trying to see this landscape through the eyes of the imagined Black subject,
Right.
moving through and negotiating that landscape. So it was the first group of work pictures that I made in which, while the human subject was still central to it, the human presence was not visible in the photograph. And it required a kind of channeling, radical reimagining of what I was seeing it as if, seeing it as if it was the landscape.
Yeah. So the camera is as a stand-in for the viewer.
Yes. Which, in different ways, it always is.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? In different ways, the camera, because the viewer will only come to know the subject or the place through the placement of the camera, and that placement of the camera for me always signifies something. But this was the first time having to navigate this idea of, if you want to call it by a genre, to navigate this idea of the landscape, the unpopulated, terrain of the land, in which the human experience is deeply embedded, but not visible. So that work for me, which I have to say, if we were to circle back to Harlem Redux, Harlem Redux, which was my return to photographing in Harlem, 40 years after the making of Harlem, USA. That was actually the first time I began to look deeply at the narrative of space and place, as opposed to the human subject and the narrative of the human subject overlaid with the narrative and the geography of place. So Night Coming Tenderly Black comes out of my increasing facility with making photographs that are unpopulated in a sense, and also to make photographs that, like the Birmingham Project, kind of inextricably pulls the viewer into the past, even as they know they're standing very much in the present moment. But to make work that almost inextricably takes you to the place that the work is about.
There's a very, very interesting position in the photographs that I wanted to ask you about, because, if one went to a site of horror, like a Buchenwald or a Dachau or an Auschwitz, there is this concentrated image of those places, which is represented by the floor, the layout of the machinery of death. But in what you were doing, there were no monuments, there was no track, there was no evidence. So how did you go about making your choices about depicting the places that you were going to depict, and they become, they become very resonant and powerful, but they also are such beautiful images. How do you balance that? How do you choose and then balance?
There's the overlaying of a lot of different impulses, but the work Well, to answer the question directly before I go in a different direction, the choice to photograph in particular parts of northeastern Ohio were anchored by the few actual Underground Railroad related sites that I came through reference, through research.
Like John Brown's.
Yeah, John Brown's house,
Yeah.
Kozad Bates' house. There were a few that are known locations, but the vast majority of the Underground Railroad sites were, of course, of necessity, unknown. They had to be. They were sites for, fugitive enslaved people to take refuge. So no one, it was never meant to be known where those places were. But using those known sites like John Brown, the site of, the former site of John Brown's tannery. And I started with the house and then tried to imagine the movement towards the house. It could have been from this way. It could have been from the forest over there. It could have been from down the road. So basically, once I found a site, my assistant and I, we just drove around. And if I saw anything that I thought I could translate into an interesting photograph within that landscape, and also looking for certain things like bodies of water, because within the narrative of escaped enslaved people, water is very important, because if you're being tracked and you go into the water and go a ways down, the dogs will lose your scent. So I knew I wanted to make some photographs that included bodies of water. But the majority of sites were looking at a place and imagining it as another place, not that place, but a place that was part of the movement, in this case, towards John Brown's house. So anywhere within, I don't know, we just drive around a 1, 2, 3 mile vicinity of the house would be fair game, because no one knows exactly how, fugitive enslaved people approach the house. So it was just about trying to imagine that landscape and that movement through their eyes, and then amplifying it. And part of the amplification, of course, was printing them as if they were moving through that landscape under cover of darkness. Because it wasn't nighttime when I made the photograph, but that was the idea. So I had to see them as if, I had to see them during daylight as if as the thing I was going to make.
Right.
So it was all about a kind of radical reimagining of the thing that I was seeing.
Dawoud, you and I have been friends a very long time. And I know that you are one of the most beloved people in this community. Everybody is incredibly respectful of you and loves you and reveres you for your work and for the pioneering nature of your work over the last 4 decades. It would be remiss of me, you've talked a lot about history. It would be remiss of me if I did not ask you, we are living in a hugely historic moment. We're enduring the pandemic. We're enduring the worst president probably in the history of this country. The most divisive president that I've ever experienced in my lifetime. And we have the beacon of light, finally, that is Black Lives Matter. It would be remiss of me if I didn't ask you how you were feeling about this, the hope of this political moment.
Well, it is like most significant moment. It is a fraught moment, and it's also, I would say it is an extremely fraught moment, but that is also overlaid with a profound sense of possibility, a profound sense of reimagining, reconsidering, realignment, things being brought forth that have been kept private. There are a number of, I think, deeply transformative conversations going on right now that are going to change the shape of whatever it is we emerge from this moment into. It's going to be different, certainly. And I think it's up to us both as artists, probably more significantly as citizens, to, you know, try to imagine and put into action what the moment is going to be that we emerge from. You know, it's a profound moment of institutional reconsideration. Institutions are now having to grapple with things that have been suggested and hinted at and talked about periodically, but that are now being talked about very adamantly. And for me, you know, I come out of a history of confrontation politics. You know, what's happening now it certainly reminds me of my life as a young person in 1967, 68, 69, right, during the Vietnam War, during my time in the Black Panther Party. So for me, it's good to see the extraordinary range of young people who have taken to the street, you know, holding the state to account, which I don't believe would have happened in the absence of this pandemic moment. Everybody would have been too busy doing whatever else they were doing. Everything else is removed, and all you're left with is these images that you're seeing on your laptop, on your computer, on various streaming platforms, and you're not going to work.
So are you optimistic about the energy and the momentum of this moment being sustained past the point where we re-enter whatever the world is going to look like when we re-enter it? Do you think that energy is going to be sustained? Because you and I are pretty much exactly the same age. I grew up in England, you grew up in America, and we have similar trajectories socially, I think, background-wise. And I feel like there is more possibility and optimism about something really changing this time now than I can remember ever. I don't know if you feel the same thing.
But I would use a phrase that I very often use. I'm optimistic, but I'm cautiously optimistic, you know, because there's going to have to be a programmatic structure wrapped around this. But even, like, I've been, a friend of mine who I know you know in Richmond, Virginia, has been posting every day the removal of the Confederate monument, Valerie Cassell Oliver. She's been posting these photographs. That discussion has been going on for as long as I can remember. And I think by the end of the week, all of those monuments may be gone.
Well, 2 days ago, the Jeb Stuart monument that Kehinde Wiley responded to when he went there and was appalled by Monument Mile was removed. And his sculpture is the only one standing in Richmond that is untouched and well looked after. And it seems to me, and that was inaugurated on December the 10th, 2019, how the world has changed. But it seems to me that there is one whole big mess of poetic justice in this moment.
Yeah, I agree. And it's so wonderfully ironic that, Kahinde's piece was installed as an oppositional gesture. I don't think we thought that we would see the dominoes, so to speak, fall so quickly, So I think that is indicative of something. Plus the fact that these young people who are coming out in these various protest and social uprisings, they are facing an extraordinary level of police violence, and yet they keep coming back.
Yeah.
And
there's a few oldies in there as well, Dawoud. There's a few veterans who've turned up occasionally as well. So.
Yeah, because there's an awareness that's come out of this. Yeah. That is almost irrefutable. That yes, we are indeed living in a police state. I think that not everyone was necessarily on the same page about that, and certainly there are some who aren't now, but there are a lot more who are aware of that. For Minneapolis to have defunded their police, there's a profound moment of change taking place, and I think within what I might call our community. The art community, I really think that artists are going to need to play a very active role in this conversation and not sitting on the sidelines waiting to see what happens next.
That's a place I wanted to go to next, because we talked a little bit about the social politics of the moment. To return it back to art, do you see, we are living in a historic moment, there's no question. I mean, it's palpable. Do you see a very interesting bodies of work emerging from this moment in response to it? What do you think is going to happen?
Not yet, because our ability to know what's being done and what each other is doing at this moment has been seriously curtailed. So I don't know. And I don't know that the work, depending on the artist, I don't necessarily know that the work has to, in a very legible and didactic way, reflect the moment. I don't think Stanley Whitney's going to become a social protest figurative artist. Their work is going to, what I mean? There is good work that will continue to be made. And of course, for certain artists, there will be work that is more responsive of the particular set of social circumstances that we're in. But I think, if nothing else, it calls us all to a different degree of mindfulness. We're artists, and I don't think that we should be doing anything necessarily because we're artists as much as we should be engaged because we're citizens, and citizenship makes certain demands on you. Democracy is not a spectator sport. But I think also for artists and those who engage in the art community, just to really start thinking more deeply and actively about the expectations that we have of the community that we function inside of, and the institutions that, in one way or another, are the ways in which our work enters into a public conversation.
We've talked on many occasions about your work, and I don't think I've ever heard you use the word political. I've heard you talk about the historical context of the work and the social context of the work. But I don't think I've ever heard you use the word political. Would you regard yourself as being a political artist, either with a small p or a large p?
I think I'm a political being.
Right.
There's no escaping that.
Yeah.
So that would have to, I think, be the answer. As a Black person in America, by default,
Yeah.
my answer would have to be yes. Now, that doesn't dictate what I make. It doesn't dictate at all the kind of work that I make. It doesn't necessarily dictate that I make work that is, I don't know, responsive to the social or political moment in a very didactic kind of way. But for me, the work that I make, you know, I have always wanted to be engaged in the world in a meaningful way, to be engaged in the world in a way that responds to who I am, and then to figure out how to make some rigorous objects in
Yeah.
response to that. You know,
Dawoud, if you were not an artist, what would you be?
probably what I was before I was an artist. Although, you know, I started off as a musician.
Yeah.
I was a drummer. I'm still a writer. I don't write as much as I used to, but I used to do quite a bit of writing, most of it not at all, about photography, some of it about art, some of it about art in a social context. But I think by vocation, if I wasn't making work, I probably would be writing a lot more.
And I know that you are somebody who goes and listens to a lot of live jazz. Are you still playing?
Yeah, music. I would say that one of my initial, immediate, one of the initial experiences that I had that was truly transformative for me was my first encounter with John Coltrane. That changed pretty much everything for me. I was still a musician at the time and a saxophone player in one of the bands that I was in. You know, because I started out playing in garage bands and funk bands, and then the saxophonist in one of those bands was also very deep into what we call jazz. And he brought John Coltrane's A Love Supreme to the rehearsal and said, here, check this out. He and I ended up in several other bands together after that.
Did that encourage you or intimidate you so much that you gave up?
It encouraged me. It pointed the way, because what it did, you know, John Coltrane, in the liner notes for A Love Supreme, he talked very openly and adamantly about wanting his music to be a force for good. That caught my attention.
Right.
That the music could be a force for good, that one could take active responsibility for that. And along with that, John Coltrane was probably, I wouldn't say probably, I would say undoubtedly the most forward-looking and rigorous musician of his time. So this idea that the work that an artist does can be both rigorous in a very rigorous way. You know, Coltrane, whenever he was performing in the clubs, you know, there were well-known stories that were told about him. The other members of the band would be sitting at the bar in between sets having drinks. and everybody would be like, "Where's John? Where's John?" And he would be back in the dressing room practicing scales. That's how rigorous his practice was.
Right.
He was already there in terms of if you want to think about being there.
Yeah.
But the level of rigor that he brought to his practice, and the fact that his practice also had a moral dimension that he was not at all hesitant to speak to, that was deeply meaningful to me. That the work functioned that way, and that you could also, in your practice, as a maker, be extraordinarily rigorous. That he became my compass, even when I was no longer a musician. I always, I want Night Coming Tenderly Black to have the force of John Coltrane.
That's a
To
beautiful.
stand in front of it and just be
That's
backwards.
That's a very nice frame of reference, literally frame of reference.
He's my barometer. He's my marker.
Dawoud, whose work do you look at and admire, either historically or amongst your peers?
In terms of music?
No, in terms of visual art.
Well, let me go back to music. I'm gonna force you back to the music because I never miss an opportunity to hear him. I think David Murray is that. The saxophonist David Murray, certainly. So I would always say David Murray. Probably the artist that I'm most in conversation with is Turquoise Dyson. She and I have a very deep ongoing conversation around making and the kind of narrative that can be embedded in making, the narrative of materiality, the narrative of Blackness, both as subject and object. And always Carrie Maureen. We go back to the beginning, and she is still someone,
Carrie's,
and as a person, as an artist, that I have the highest regard for. I'm not going to sit here and start making a long list. I'll give the obvious because I don't want to leave anybody out.
No, that's
David Murray, Turquoise Dyson, Carrie Maureen.
That's a good short list.
Stanley Whitney. I'll go see Stanley anytime. Because I came up, I make photographs primarily, but coming up, I spent most of my time in the studios of various painters, Ed Clark, Al Loving, and even getting on the bus and going out to Plainfield, New Jersey to be with Mel Edwards, because they were Black and they were artists and they were rigorous and they talked about making things.
Yeah.
Because to me, photographs, I always cringe when I hear people talk about taking pictures or, you're making something. A photograph is as much a made object as it is the thing that it's about and the thing that it's of. And I found with most of the photographers that I came up, eventually the conversation ended up being too much about the thing that the picture was of.
Right.
Or what it was about, and not the making of the photograph as a material object that had a certain material quality, and that also had a certain sense of how it sits on the wall. And I have to say, Roy De Carava is another one, much like John Coltrane. Early on, I would say De Carava had the same kind of impact on me that Coltrane did.
Well, Dawoud, I could talk to you forever. We were supposed to take 30 minutes of your time. We've already done.
All right, let's keep going.
We've already done 45 and we're just getting going. We have to do this again another time. It's always fascinating to talk to you. It's always fascinating to think, just to hear the great.
Let me ask you, since this is supposed to be a conversation, I think. I don't think this is an interview.
I think
how are you doing?
everybody who's stayed on this call for the last 45 minutes are here because they want to hear what you have to say, not because they want to hear what I have to say.
Okay, we'll talk when I see you.
We'll do it another time and you can ask the questions. Anyway, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure. It's great to see you looking so well. I can't wait to see you in person as soon as this is all over.
Okay.
We will.
To checking in, Valerie Cassell Oliver.
Oh, Valerie's
thank you both. Thank you for checking in, Valerie.
And then Schaefer. Valerie has been keeping us all on the straight and narrow here, and we didn't even know it. All right, it's great to see you as always. You take care, and we'll see you real soon.
Okay, I'm glad we could touch on a little bit. If you want to do part 2, let me know. I'm up for it.
I'll do it every Thursday with you.
Okay, and thank all of you for taking time out to watch.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for everybody for participating.
Okay, man. Take care. I'll see you.
Take care. Ciao.
All right.